The alarm rang sharply at 6:45 a.m., slicing through the morning quiet of the small town of Briarwood, and I groaned, rolling over, trying to ignore the relentless sound. But I knew I had no choice. Today was supposed to be ordinary. Just another day of running my small bookstore, organizing inventory, and dealing with the local regulars who always had opinions about everything, from the color of the shelves to the way I stacked the new arrivals. I dragged myself out of bed, pulling on the soft cotton robe I had hung over the chair the night before, and headed to the kitchen. The faint smell of rain lingered from the previous night, and the gray light filtering through the curtains gave everything a muted, almost somber tone. I brewed my coffee slowly, savoring the aroma, trying to anchor myself in a small sense of normalcy, because deep down, I felt the unease building, the nagging sensation that something was off, though I couldn't pinpoint what. The phone on the counter blinked insistently, a message from my assistant Jenna, reminding me of a delivery scheduled for today. But when I glanced at it, there was a second notification, one I hadn't seen before. It was an email from an unknown address, subject line, "Regarding your inheritance." My heart skipped a beat, coffee forgotten in my hand, because I hadn't thought about the family estate in years. Not since my grandfather passed, and the settlement had caused more headaches than I cared to remember. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard, debating whether to open it or not. Curiosity won. The email began plainly enough, but the content was anything but. It contained spreadsheets, scanned letters, and legal notes that referenced my name in ways I had never imagined. My father's meticulous handwriting, barely legible, was on one document, alongside figures that suggested there had been financial movements I hadn't been told about. I sank into the chair, the coffee cooling beside me, as I scrolled through pages of information that felt like a puzzle constructed deliberately to confuse me, or perhaps to test me. I needed to think, but my mind was racing, linking memories of family gatherings, whispered conversations, and subtle hints that had never made sense until now. The morning passed in a haze of calculations, phone calls to distant relatives, and a growing sense of dread. I had trusted them for years, but every line, every footnote revealed that my family had been maneuvering behind the scenes, making decisions that affected me profoundly while I was distracted by work, friends, and the quiet rhythm of my daily life. By mid-afternoon, I had pieced together enough to understand that my grandfather's estate had been divided, but not evenly, and certain assets I had assumed were mine, had been sold or reassigned without my knowledge. I could feel the anger rising. Not the kind of quick, explosive rage, but the slow, simmering kind that sits under your skin and makes every interaction tense, every word you speak measured. I decided to visit the lawyer who had handled my grandfather's will. The office was in the center of town, in a brick building that smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Mr. Ellison greeted me with his usual reserved smile, but I could see a flicker of surprise when I mentioned the email. He led me to his office, closing the door behind us. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke. "You've received something unusual," he said, his voice low and steady. "Something that suggests your family hasn't been entirely forthcoming." I nodded, showing him the email and the attachments. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "This is complex, but it's clear that there have been transactions and decisions made without your consent, and in some cases, without your knowledge entirely. Your grandfather left specific instructions, but it seems that some parties interpreted them in ways that benefited themselves disproportionately. I felt a chill. This was worse than I imagined. Not only had I been left out of the distribution, but the actions taken were deliberate, calculated, and hidden. My mind flashed to my father, the way he had smiled at family events, the way my brother had casually mentioned certain purchases as if they were ordinary, when in fact they had been part of a much larger scheme. Mr. Ellison continued, outlining the steps I could take legally. But he also warned that family dynamics could complicate matters. Litigation would be messy, public, and emotionally taxing. I thanked him, leaving the office with a heavy heart, my thoughts racing. Walking back through the streets of Briarwood, I realized that my perception of family, the safety I had taken for granted, was fractured. Every conversation I remembered seemed layered with hidden meaning, every gesture potentially a calculated move. At home, I sat at the dining table, papers spread before me, sipping coffee I didn't want but needed for clarity. I had to plan carefully. Any misstep could ruin my case, both legally and socially. My grandfather's intentions were clear in his notes, but the interpretation had been skewed by those I trusted most. That evening, I called my brother, trying to maintain calm. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end. "About what?" he finally asked, nonchalant but with a hint of unease. "About the estate. About what's happened behind my back," I said. Silence. "I don't know what you mean," he replied, a practiced tone of innocence. I knew better. "I have the documents, the communications, the proof. I suggest we handle this carefully," I said, emphasizing carefully. "I'm not interested in conflict, but I also won't ignore this." He laughed lightly, a sound meant to disarm, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see," he said, ending the call abruptly. I set the phone down, feeling the tension settle in my chest like a weight. It was clear that the battle had begun, but it wasn't a battle I intended to lose. Over the next several days, I contacted my grandfather's old associates, piecing together a timeline of actions, purchases, and transfers. Every call, every email, every small detail added to the mosaic of what had happened. The more I uncovered, the more it became apparent that my family had been complicit in bending my grandfather's intentions to their benefit. It wasn't just negligence, it was a deliberate manipulation. At night, I reviewed old family photos, letters tucked into boxes, and documents stored in my safe. The juxtaposition was surreal. Images of laughter and birthday cakes, and just below them, financial statements and transfer forms, showing how easily smiles could conceal betrayal. I felt a mixture of sadness and steely determination. If my grandfather were alive, he would expect me to act with intelligence and composure. And so I planned. I would not confront blindly, I would not lash out, but I would ensure that the truth came to light and that my rights were recognized. Days turned into a week. I arranged meetings with my lawyer and a private investigator, creating a network of oversight that would uncover every hidden transaction. I documented everything meticulously, understanding that precision was my ally. Late one night, I sat at my desk, reviewing a final spreadsheet detailing the flow of funds, and I noticed something unexpected. A small transfer, overlooked by everyone, directed toward a charitable trust my grandfather had established. This anomaly could serve as a lever, a subtle way to demonstrate intent and to challenge the misappropriations without escalating conflict unnecessarily. I leaned back, letting the tension ebb for a moment. A plan was forming. Not revenge, but justice. The next morning, I drafted letters to my family. Not accusing, not inflaming, but requesting clarification, documentation, and meetings. Each sentence was chosen carefully to convey authority, composure, and the inescapable awareness that I had uncovered the layers of deception. Their initial responses were defensive, minimal, and dismissive. I anticipated this. It only confirmed the necessity of patience, strategy, and evidence. I coordinated with my lawyer to ensure that every interaction was recorded and every response documented. I wanted transparency, not theatrics. But I also wanted the moral weight of the truth to be undeniable. Week by week, the tension grew. Subtle changes appeared. Emails were slower, calls were guarded, and small hesitations in speech betrayed awareness of the depth of my knowledge. I noticed it in my father's tone, in my brother's careful phrasing, in the briefest glance at family gatherings. The dynamics of trust and power were shifting imperceptibly, yet unmistakably. One afternoon, I received a call from my grandfather's longtime accountant, a man who had been silent through years of disputes. His voice was hesitant but respectful. "I have some additional documentation that might clarify things," he said. The documents revealed minor discrepancies, overlooked by my family, and a trail of communications that substantiated my claims. This revelation was the breakthrough. I now had the final pieces of the puzzle, proof that could not be dismissed. With these documents, I scheduled a family meeting, orchestrated with careful attention to timing, place, and witnesses, ensuring that the discussion would be both controlled and revealing. The day of the meeting arrived. The room was quiet, the tension palpable, each family member aware, perhaps subconsciously, of the gathering storm. I presented the documentation calmly, methodically, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. No accusations, no dramatics, just facts. The effect was immediate. Faces drained of color, eyes widened, and the careful composure some had maintained for weeks slipped. Questions, stammered responses, and attempts at diversion arose, but the clarity and organization of my presentation made deflection impossible. I had planned meticulously for this moment, understanding both the emotional and psychological weight it carried. By the end of the meeting, an acknowledgement was made, subtle, yet sufficient. The estate would be rectified, some misappropriations corrected, and my grandfather's intentions would finally be honored. Relief and a cautious satisfaction settled over me, but I remained vigilant. Trust, once broken, is fragile, and while the immediate crisis was resolved, the relationships required careful navigation going forward. That evening, I sat alone in my office, looking out over Briarwood's quiet streets, the soft light of sunset casting long shadows. I reflected on the journey, the quiet research, the careful orchestration, the emotional resilience, and the strategic patience that had brought resolution. The sense of justice achieved was satisfying, but it was tempered by the knowledge of human complexity, of how easily affection, loyalty, and family ties can be manipulated, and how critical it is to maintain awareness, strategy, and composure in the face of deceit. I poured a cup of tea, sipping slowly, and allowed myself a rare moment of contentment. This was not just about winning a dispute, it was about reclaiming agency, ensuring that my voice, my rights, and my grandfather's legacy were preserved. The quiet in the room was profound, yet comforting. Outside, the town carried on, unaware of the intricacies, tensions, and victories that had unfolded within a single home. I realized that this was the essence of resilience: maintaining clarity, pursuing truth, and acting with integrity, even when surrounded by deception, complexity, and human frailty. Each action, each decision had been deliberate, measured, and executed with the full awareness of both risk and reward. And in that realization, I found not only satisfaction, but a blueprint for navigating future challenges, knowing that diligence, patience, and strategic thinking could uncover truths and preserve what truly matters. The days that followed the family meeting were a delicate balance of observation, subtle interaction, and strategic patience. Every dinner, every casual conversation, every seemingly mundane family interaction became an exercise in perception, a test of how much could be read between the lines. My father, usually so commanding, spoke with a new caution, measuring each word, avoiding eye contact when discussing financial matters. My brother seemed nervous, almost jittery, and even my mother's smile had a trace of unease, a flicker of something unspoken that betrayed her awareness of the shifted balance. I kept meticulous notes, documenting the smallest reactions, small inconsistencies in statements, and the quiet pauses that hinted at guilt or planning. Each note was a puzzle piece, and each family interaction provided new angles on the larger picture of how the estate had been handled. The bookstore became my sanctuary. Among the smell of old pages, the quiet hum of customers, and the predictable rhythm of daily routines, I could focus, think, and plan. I began analyzing past financial records, cross-referencing every transfer, every sale, and every invoice connected to the estate. Patterns emerged: subtle diversions, misallocated assets, and repeated omissions that revealed a calculated effort to mislead me. It was meticulous work, exhausting in its detail, yet deeply satisfying as I uncovered the truths hidden beneath layers of deception. Late one evening, Jenna arrived at the bookstore with a stack of files. "I think I found something," she said, her voice low, urgent. We spread the papers across the counter, examining each document carefully. One particular file stood out: a ledger with handwritten notes from the estate manager. The entries contradicted statements my family had made, detailing transfers to accounts I had never been told existed. The implications were clear. Not only had I been sidelined, but deliberate efforts had been made to ensure I remained unaware. This discovery fueled a renewed sense of purpose. I began constructing a timeline, mapping each decision and transaction against key family events, revealing the strategy behind the moves. Birthday parties, anniversaries, and casual visits were now seen through a lens of deliberate timing and manipulation. I realized that my grandfather's intentions had been obscured not by accident, but by conscious choices made by those I had trusted implicitly. With the timeline and evidence in hand, I consulted with Mr. Ellison again, discussing possible next steps. Litigation was one option, but I also considered negotiation, using the evidence to guide the family toward a resolution that respected my grandfather's original intentions. I needed to weigh emotional fallout, public perception, and long-term relationships. The tension at home was palpable. My father's phone calls became terse, my brother's jokes forced, and my mother's casual comments carried undertones of defensiveness. I observed them carefully, noting reactions, adjusting my approach, and planning each interaction with precision. In the evenings, I retreated to my office, reviewing documents, rereading old letters from my grandfather, and reflecting on the subtle cues from family interactions. Each night added clarity. The inconsistencies, the omissions, the small hints of manipulation, all pointed to a single truth. My family had underestimated my diligence, my awareness, and my ability to follow the trail of evidence to its conclusion. Weeks passed, and I decided it was time to act decisively. I arranged a private meeting with a few trusted advisors and the estate manager. Together, we mapped out a presentation that would lay bare the discrepancies and omissions, illustrating the contrast between my grandfather's documented intentions and the actions taken by certain family members. The day of the meeting arrived. The room was quiet, tension thick in the air. My father, mother, and brother entered, unaware of the detailed preparation that awaited them. I presented the evidence systematically, each point meticulously documented, each discrepancy illustrated with clarity and precision. There were no accusations, no dramatic flair, only facts, timelines, and corroborated documents. The reactions were immediate. My father's composure faltered slightly. My brother shifted uncomfortably, and my mother's expression betrayed a mix of surprise and concern. Questions arose, defensive explanations attempted, but the thoroughness of the presentation left little room for misdirection. The impact was undeniable. The truth was clear, the manipulation evident, and the weight of evidence undeniable. Following the meeting, discussions turned toward resolution. Negotiations were tense, with each party aware that missteps could have lasting consequences. I maintained a calm, measured approach, emphasizing clarity, fairness, and adherence to my grandfather's original intentions. Over several days, agreements were drafted, financial adjustments made, and the estate realigned to reflect a more just distribution. The process was exhaustive, emotionally charged, and required constant vigilance to ensure compliance. Throughout, I maintained a detailed record of interactions, communications, and agreements, safeguarding against future attempts at obfuscation or misrepresentation. The family dynamic shifted noticeably. Meetings became more cautious, interactions more measured, and the previously unspoken hierarchies subtly rebalanced. Trust, though not fully restored, was tempered by the clear understanding that transparency and evidence were now non-negotiable. At home, I found moments of reflection. Sitting by the window, overlooking Briarwood's quiet streets, I contemplated the journey, the uncovering of deceit, the careful navigation of family politics, and the meticulous reconstruction of what should have been straightforward. The lessons were profound. Awareness, diligence, patience, and strategic thinking could counter even the most deliberate manipulation. Late one evening, I received a call from a distant relative, someone who had observed the estate's handling quietly for years. "You've done well," they said. "Few would have had the patience, the insight, or the resilience to see this through." Their words were gratifying, but also a reminder of the vigilance required. Resolution was not a single moment, but a sustained process, requiring ongoing attention and discernment. In the weeks that followed, minor disputes emerged. Questions about specific assets, interpretations of agreements, and occasional tensions. Each was addressed with the same careful approach: document, clarify, communicate, and ensure alignment with the established framework. Gradually, the atmosphere shifted from covert tension to cautious cooperation. Family gatherings resumed, though always under the watchful eye of documentation and transparency. I began to see subtle changes. My father speaking more openly about intentions, my brother acknowledging errors without defensiveness, and my mother offering explanations where previously there had been avoidance. The bookstore remained my sanctuary, the quiet hum of customers providing a counterpoint to the ongoing family dynamics. I continued reviewing documents, maintaining vigilance, and reflecting on the intricate interplay of human behavior, trust, and strategy. By the end of the month, a semblance of balance had returned. The estate was aligned more closely with my grandfather's intentions, discrepancies addressed, and channels for communication established to prevent future misunderstandings. I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not from triumph over family, but from the restoration of integrity and the careful safeguarding of legacy. One afternoon, I sat at the desk, reviewing the final agreements. The weight of the past weeks lifted slightly, leaving a sense of clarity and perspective. I had learned the nuances of observation, the importance of patience, and the power of strategic planning in the face of deceit. The journey had been exhausting, challenging, and emotionally taxing, yet profoundly instructive. I realized that life's most critical lessons often emerge from navigating complexity, confronting uncomfortable truths, and exercising both intellect and emotional resilience. With the estate properly managed, the family dynamics stabilized, and my grandfather's legacy preserved, I felt a renewed sense of agency. The strategies, insights, and lessons learned would guide future interactions, both personal and professional, providing a framework for discerning truth, maintaining integrity, and protecting what truly matters. In the quiet of the bookstore, as the late afternoon light filtered through the windows, I reflected on the journey from ignorance to awareness, from deception to clarity, and from passive observation to deliberate action. The process had transformed my understanding of trust, family, and responsibility, illustrating that careful attention, persistence, and emotional intelligence could overcome even the most entrenched attempts at manipulation. And though the path had been arduous, the outcomes affirmed the value of vigilance, strategy, and ethical perseverance, setting a precedent for future challenges and ensuring that the lessons of the past would inform decisions yet to come. The final stretch of the journey was marked by intense focus, careful observation, and a strategic patience honed over weeks of navigating family dynamics and estate management. I spent long hours in the bookstore and my office, sifting through documents, reanalyzing timelines, and reflecting on subtle human behaviors that had previously seemed inconsequential. Each minor reaction from my father, mother, or brother became a piece of data, a signal that helped me predict future maneuvers. I noticed patterns in the way my father shifted topics whenever financial discussions arose, how my mother hesitated slightly before offering explanations, and how my brother's tone betrayed nervousness even when speaking about unrelated matters. These observations became the foundation of a comprehensive plan, one that would not only secure my grandfather's legacy, but also establish clear boundaries for future interactions. Meetings with the estate manager and trusted advisors were crucial. Together, we meticulously verified every account, traced every transfer, and documented every anomaly. Discrepancies that seemed minor individually revealed a larger pattern of manipulation when assembled chronologically. I developed a series of presentations that could clearly illustrate these patterns, ensuring that when the evidence was revealed to the family, the narrative could not be dismissed or distorted. As the day of confrontation approached, I prepared mentally, rehearsing the delivery of the information, anticipating reactions, and planning responses to potential objections. The strategy was simple: present facts, maintain composure, and allow the clarity of evidence to speak for itself. When the day arrived, the room was filled with tension, each family member acutely aware that the carefully constructed plan would be unveiled. I began systematically, showing timelines, account statements, and documented communications, emphasizing discrepancies between the documented intentions of my grandfather and the actions taken by specific family members. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Nervous glances were exchanged, subtle defensiveness emerged, and the weight of undeniable evidence became apparent. Questions were raised, explanations offered, but the thoroughness of the presentation left no room for fabrication or evasion. The meeting transitioned into negotiation. I maintained a firm yet measured tone, guiding the discussion toward fair resolution and adherence to my grandfather's wishes. Emotional undertones were present, as the discussion inevitably triggered feelings of guilt, defensiveness, and regret. But the focus remained on clarity and rectifying the mismanaged elements of the estate. Over the following weeks, adjustments were made to financial distributions, and previously hidden accounts were clarified, ensuring transparency and fairness. Communication channels were established to prevent future miscommunication and maintain accountability. The family dynamic evolved. Initial defensiveness gave way to cautious cooperation. My father began to engage more openly about the estate and family affairs, acknowledging past oversights. My brother, though initially reluctant, showed signs of understanding, and my mother became more transparent in her communications, reducing the need for constant verification. Throughout this period, I continued meticulous documentation, maintaining records of conversations, decisions, and financial adjustments. This archive served as both a safeguard and a reference, ensuring that accountability remained clear and disputes could be addressed promptly. The bookstore remained a sanctuary, offering a space for reflection and strategic planning. In the quiet of its shelves and the familiar rhythm of daily operations, I found clarity, focus, and the energy to navigate ongoing family complexities. Lessons learned during this period were profound. Awareness, diligence, strategic patience, and emotional intelligence are indispensable tools when confronting deliberate manipulation, even within one's own family. Over time, the family began to recognize the importance of transparency and communication. Routine interactions were no longer governed by implicit assumptions or hidden agendas. Meetings became structured, with clear agendas and follow-ups to ensure clarity and alignment. Subtle changes were visible in social interactions: polite acknowledgement of responsibilities, reduced defensiveness, and a gradual rebuilding of trust where possible. Personal reflection played a critical role. I considered not only the financial and strategic aspects, but also the emotional complexities of the family's behavior. Patterns of avoidance, subtle manipulation, and passive aggression were identified and understood, allowing me to respond effectively without escalating conflicts unnecessarily. Evening reflections at home or in the bookstore offered perspective, reminding me of the long-term goal: preserving legacy, ensuring fairness, and fostering a healthier dynamic moving forward. The culmination of the estate negotiations brought resolution. Agreements were formalized, documents signed, and a comprehensive framework established to prevent recurrence of previous deceptions. The final arrangements honored my grandfather's intentions and reinstated balance where disruption had occurred. While emotional scars remained, the clarity and fairness of the resolution provided a foundation for measured, constructive future interactions. Moments of personal satisfaction arose not from victory over family, but from the restoration of integrity, justice, and adherence to principle. Throughout, I remained mindful of the emotional toll. Navigating betrayal, disappointment, and defensive reactions required constant patience and composure. The balance of strategy and empathy proved essential to achieving a resolution that was fair, sustainable, and aligned with long-term relational and financial goals. As weeks turned into months, a new rhythm emerged. Family interactions, while cautious, became less strained. Trust was rebuilt incrementally, facilitated by transparency, consistent communication, and the demonstration that manipulative actions were neither unnoticed nor acceptable. I recognized that change was gradual and required persistent attention to both factual and emotional landscapes. The bookstore continued to serve as a retreat, a place to recalibrate, reflect, and maintain perspective. In this quiet environment, I refined strategic planning skills, reinforced the importance of patience and attention to detail, and maintained awareness of subtle social cues. By the end of the year, the family estate was fully aligned with my grandfather's documented intentions. Discrepancies had been corrected, communication protocols established, and accountability ensured. While some relationships remained strained, the balance of fairness, transparency, and documented oversight provided a platform for healthier future interactions. In the solitude of the bookstore, late afternoon sunlight casting warm tones across the shelves, I reflected on the journey. What had begun as a frustrating labyrinth of omissions, hidden accounts, and deliberate misdirection transformed into a complex exercise in observation, strategy, and emotional intelligence. The lessons extended beyond finances. They encompassed understanding human behavior, anticipating reactions, and maintaining integrity under pressure. The resolution brought a sense of accomplishment tempered by humility. Victories were measured not by emotional dominance, but by clarity, fairness, and the successful restoration of what was rightfully intended. Even as life returned to a semblance of normalcy, the awareness and skills gained remained invaluable, guiding personal and professional decisions, reinforcing vigilance and instilling the importance of methodical, ethical action in the face of deception. The final reflection underscored a profound truth. Vigilance, patience, and strategic empathy can overcome deliberate attempts to manipulate, even within the closest family bonds. And that the combination of observation, careful planning, and ethical perseverance is a formidable tool for safeguarding legacy, integrity, and relationships. And so, as the sun set behind the trees lining Briarwood, the final chapters of the estate's journey closed not with drama or retribution, but with clarity, fairness, and the quiet satisfaction of a challenge overcome through intelligence, observation, and steadfast resolve. I left the bookstore that evening, the streets quiet, the night air crisp, and felt the culmination of months of strategy, analysis, and careful engagement. The lessons would stay with me forever. The understanding of human behavior, the necessity of documentation, and the enduring power of patience and strategic action in maintaining both justice and family integrity. As the door closed behind me, I felt an unexpected sense of closure, a rare combination of relief, accomplishment, and anticipation for the future. While challenges would inevitably arise again, the framework established ensured that future interactions could proceed with clarity, fairness, and accountability. The journey had transformed my understanding of trust, strategy, and the subtle complexities of family dynamics. In the quiet of the bookstore, with only the faint hum of evening traffic outside and the smell of paper and coffee around me, I understood that the combination of diligence, observation, and ethical perseverance was more than a method. It was a safeguard, a philosophy, a commitment to integrity that could guide every decision and interaction moving forward.